They never meant for you to hear this. The mountain towns were told to stay quiet. Entire bloodlines disappeared in the fog. What you're about to hear, they buried it beneath centuries of folklore and fear. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was too real. And now, it's clawing its way back through the dirt. Let's begin where the maps go blank. Appalachia? That long, winding stretch of ancient hills and shadows. Not just trees and silence, but something much older than the country itself. People think of poverty, coal miners, maybe old-time religion. But that's the lie they fed the cities. You weren't supposed to know about the blood cults, the sealed caverns, the families that survived winter without food, because they had another source. Flesh. This isn't legend. This is what happens when isolation meets obsession. And when old, pre-Christian rites crawl into the bones of desperate people. There were whispers, entire clans that never left the hollers, eyes too wide, teeth filed down, rituals passed from father to son like secrets dipped in blood. And yet, the government knew they always knew. Back in 1946, after World War II, operatives from a covered agency were sent deep into southern West Virginia. Mission classified. Local records burned. What remains is a series of fragmented testimonies, describing unnatural smells, stone altars, and children born with no tongues. The men who returned were changed. Some went mad. Others vanished. And the ones who tried to speak, found at the bottom of the river, mouths stuffed with pages from the Bible. You don't hear about this on the History Channel. You won't find it in schoolbooks. But if you trace the old family names, Reinhardt, McKellar, Boone, you'll find burial sites that don't match modern anthropology. Skeletons with filed teeth, bones showing signs of long-term malnutrition, except the femurs were hollowed out like marrow had been harvested. And the deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't survival. This was belief. Now tell me this. What kind of belief demands the sacrifice of your own blood? Because that's what we're going to uncover. Ritual by ritual. Body by body. You're not here for entertainment. You're here because something inside you knows the world is a lie. And this is the first crack in the surface. Stay with me. There's no going back now. They called it the Hollow Doctrine. Not publicly, not in any printed book, not in any church. It was whispered. Handed down through bone, blood, and nightmare. The deeper parts of the Appalachians, where satellite signals don't reach and roads give way to trails of dirt and silence. That's where the Doctrine lived. A belief system so old, so primal, it made Christianity look like a passing trend. Not a faith of light and salvation, but of flesh, decay, and memory. A covenant written not in ink, but carved into skin. At the center of this belief was a simple idea. The body is the gate. They believed flesh wasn't just meat. It was a map, an invitation to something far older than man. The Doctrine taught that pain opened the mind. Hunger sharpened the spirit. And when the blood of kin was consumed, it didn't just nourish. It connected. This is where you need to stop thinking like a modern man. Stop thinking like they trained you to. The Hollow Doctrine wasn't chaos. It wasn't some feral madness. It was structured. Intentional. There were rules. Ranks. Rites. Every scar had meaning. Every lost child, a chosen offering. Every echo through the trees, a hymn sung in a tongue that never saw paper. The families that followed this path weren't poor. They weren't ignorant. They were initiated. Taught to speak in metaphor around outsiders. Taught to wear masks when government men came asking questions. Taught to hide the real records in bone scrolls sealed inside hollowed-out stumps. The cults were generational. And they didn't call themselves cults. They called themselves keepers. But here's what's worse, some of them weren't just hiding. They were spreading. Moving outward. Quietly marrying into nearby towns. Running churches. Teaching in schools. Seeding the Hollow Doctrine into the minds of children before they even knew what fear meant. Ask yourself, why do certain counties in Kentucky have missing persons rates 5 times the national average? Why did the government seal off entire parts of the Daniel Boone National Forest after 1974? And why are the only surviving photographs of the Reinhardt family so heavily scratched, as if someone wanted to erase the eyes? Because knowledge is dangerous. But awareness? Awareness makes you unstoppable. You're starting to feel it now, aren't you? That tightness in your gut? That whisper at the back of your neck? Good. We're only 2 layers deep. And the next one. It's where we meet the first Appalachian blood priest. His name was never recorded in birth registries. No school enrollment. No census entry. No draft card. But in the whisper archives passed down by survivors and defectors, he was known only as Father Bellum, not a priest in the Catholic sense. Not a man of the cloth. He wore no robes. Just the skin of his ancestors. tanned, marked, and stitched into a vestment he claimed allowed him to speak to the voiceless beneath. He wasn't born. He was bred. Fourth-generation hollow blood, raised beneath the earth in a community with no written language, only carved stone and oral commands. He didn't teach. He corrected. Bellum believed humanity had strayed from its ancient roots. He spoke of the Great Bleaching, a time when language, electricity, and mercy diluted the sacred violence that made man powerful, and so he sought to rebuild the old ways, beginning with flesh. The initiation rites he led were not abstract. They were brutal, bone-breaking. Children of 5 were taught to sharpen their teeth and drink from the still, warm veins of the sacrificed, not out of hatred, not out of rage, but as a sacrament. One testimony, taken from a woman who escaped in 1968 after her brother was chosen for the hollowing, claims Bellum could command obedience with a glance. Not hypnosis, not suggestion, domination. That's the word she used. As if something ancient and malevolent had hollowed him out and was speaking through the shell. He would stand at the mouth of caves, eyes closed, and chant in a language no scholar could trace. Entire flocks of birds would drop dead mid-flight. Deer would walk calmly into the circle and slit their own throats against the altar stones. By the 1950s, Bellum had over 300 followers, spread across 6 states. They operated under the false fronts of independent churches, backwoods healing clinics, and off-grid farming communes. He called them the mouthless, not because they lacked mouths, but because they gave up their voice. They swore never to speak truth outside the rites, and they didn't need to. They communicated in bone glyphs, blood patterns, and hand-sewn flesh symbols. You see, Bellum wasn't just reviving an ancient belief. He was weaponizing it, and according to declassified portions of Operation Nitroot, yes, that's real. He may have had help, government help, private funding, experimental psychological research cloaked under cultural anthropology, because someone somewhere wanted to see just how far obedience could go. Let that sink in. This isn't mythology. This is your history, stolen from you. And now we begin to take it back. They say the first rule of control is to make the subject believe they are free, but in the Appalachian experiments, freedom was never on the table. By 1952, a covert behavioral unit operating out of Fort Detrick, publicly known for biological testing, launched Project Bleeding Root. The public never heard of it. Not because it failed, but because it worked too well. The aim? To study intergenerational trauma rituals. How pain, belief, and environment could forge perfect obedience. But they needed test subjects outside urban influence. Ones whose minds hadn't been tainted by television, city logic, or modern schooling. They found them in the hollers, entire families, already steeped in fear, isolation, and mystic belief, ripe for shaping. They didn't barge in with guns. That's not how control works. They sent in cultural outreach units, smiling men in flannel and ties, bearing medical supplies, radios, and food vouchers. But behind the good deeds were neurochemical aerosols, psychological triggers, and embedded agents trained to mimic devotion to the hollow doctrine. It was infiltration, surgical and slow. What they learned was disturbing. The hollow followers already operated under layered belief systems. Outer stories for outsiders, inner rites for the blood, and core truths only spoken in darkness. The government didn't need to build a cult. They just needed to amplify one. Children were observed reacting to trauma with ritualized silence. Adults would willingly mutilate themselves to mirror dream visions. Some groups began crafting new gods that matched Jungian archetypes fed to them through manipulated dreams and chemical exposure. What does that tell you? That the human mind is programmable. That belief isn't just inherited, it's installed. One defector claimed they were shown images of the president, then told he was a lesser god, unworthy of worship. That night, they burned American flags on stone altars and offered up human teeth wrapped in leather. Understand this, these weren't just cultists. They were test beds. And while the world was watching Korea and Eisenhower, the hollows of Appalachia were boiling over with engineered madness. This is the pattern: create the belief, fracture the identity, then replace it with something pliable. That's not just history. That's a blueprint. And here's where you come in. You weren't meant to hear this. But now that you have, you must choose. Stay asleep in the comfort of false history or descend deeper and reclaim the truth they've stolen. And if you're ready, comment the phrase, "I swallow the silence," twice below. Once for the lie they fed you, once for the voice you're reclaiming. We're going deeper. Next, the binding trees of Blackburn Ridge. At the edge of Clay County, Kentucky, where the road dissolves into gravel and the trees grow too close together, there is a stretch of woods locals refuse to name. but the old maps call it Blackburn Ridge. No hiking trails, no hunting, no cabins, just a thick silence that starts before you enter. Animals avoid it, radios crackle near it, and according to 5 separate missing persons reports between 1957 and 1981, people walk in and don't come back out. But it's not the disappearances that make Blackburn Ridge a forbidden zone. It's the trees. Specifically, the binding trees. To the untrained eye, they just look twisted, like nature went wrong. But to the bloodlines who still speak the hollow tongue in secret, these trees are sacred anchors. Living conduits. Each one bent and bound using a method so ancient it predates written Cherokee and Shawnee history. They were grown with purpose. Cultivated. Their roots fed with the bones of the willing, their bark carved not with words but with memory. Notched grooves, blood-sealed glyphs, and teeth marks left by initiates undergoing the hollowing. It was believed the trees absorbed trauma like energy, and in return, granted the sight. That's why the government sealed it off, not to protect people from the woods, but to protect the ritual infrastructure. Because Blackburn Ridge was more than a forest. It was a living archive. Code-named Threshold leaked classified aerial photos in 1996 showing a perfect geometric arrangement of 33 binding trees, spaced equidistantly in a pattern matching a forgotten sigil found only in 12th century Alpine occult manuscripts. No connection should exist, and yet it does. You see, what the blood cults of Appalachia called binding, the DARPA-backed researchers referred to as neural imprint transference. The theory that trauma, if ritualized and encoded properly, could store conscious patterns into the natural environment. That pain can be made permanent, not in memory, but in matter. Think about that. These weren't just symbols on bark. These were records of agony, stored in wood, designed to be awakened by sound, blood, or intent. It's why some say you can still hear screaming in the trees when the wind hits right. Not ghosts, not folklore. Playback. Your history isn't written in books. It's whispered through roots and carried in screams. And the next time someone tells you America has no ancient ruins, show them Blackburn. Because these people didn't build temples. They became them. There was a name they spoke only in the dark. The one below. Not a woman. Not a mother. Not even human. She was the center of their rites. The origin of their bloodlines. The source of power that whispered through bone and shadow. And according to the oldest hollow Doctrine texts, scratched into slate tablets with burnt antler tips, the one below sleeps beneath the mountains still, fed by the offerings of her children. Let that sink in. Not a metaphor, not a symbol. A presence, God perhaps, or something older than the concept of gods. This belief wasn't confined to just one pocket of Appalachia. Across Tennessee, West Virginia, and into northern Georgia, we find matching patterns. Identical carvings, identical chants, identical birth defects. Elongated limbs, extra teeth, black irises. These were seen as marks of favor. Evidence that a child was touched by the womb. They would lower them into caves. Infants, wrapped in rawhide, fed only the blood of their mother until they could hear the soil speak. What does that sound like to you? Ritual hallucination, genetic manipulation, spiritual possession. Now add in this, in 1973, a deep Earth sonar mapping project led by a military geologist named Malcolm Healy detected a massive hollow chamber 2 miles beneath Pine Ridge, Kentucky. The report described rhythmic acoustic phenomena, pulses, as if something alive was stirring. The data was buried. Healy disappeared. His house burned to the ground 6 months later, but someone retrieved his notes. And inside, scribbled on the back of a terrain scan, was a phrase repeated in looping, frantic handwriting. She's not sleeping. She's listening. Here's the truth they never wanted you to find. What if some belief systems aren't just cultural myths, but instructions? What if the rituals weren't invented by man, but received? What if something in the dark taught these people how to connect, how to obey, how to sacrifice, so it could feed? The one below is not gone. She's not buried. She's integrated. Into the land. Into the minds. Into the bloodlines of those who still carry the mark. And if that's true, then every hill you pass on the Blue Ridge Parkway, every deep, black hollow untouched by time, may not be empty. It may be watching. In the town of Morrow Glen, Tennessee, long since wiped off the map by a coal fire, no one investigated. There existed an institution so hidden, so protected it didn't even have a name. Locals called it the Red House. You wouldn't find it unless someone brought you. No road signs. No mail. Just a rust-colored building with no windows, set deep in the woods behind a collapsing Baptist church. From the outside, it looked abandoned. But beneath it, 8 levels of subterranean chambers, each with a single purpose, to erase the self. The Red House was not for criminals. It was for children, mostly taken from foster systems, orphanages, and problem homes across Appalachia. Kids no one would come looking for. They were told they were being adopted. What really happened was something out of your worst nightmare. Behavioral purification, using hollow doctrine principles mixed with Cold War-era psychological warfare. First, the names were taken. Literally. Files burned. New names assigned based on numerical symbolism found in the Doctrine's bloodlet texts. Then the children were separated, by voice pattern, not age. Grouped by how they responded to certain frequencies played during dream cycles. Some woke up crying. Some woke up speaking in languages that didn't exist. And those were the ones they kept. We now know through partial leaks from Project Motherbone, a now defunct CIA Black Ops directive, that the Red House wasn't just an Appalachian phenomenon. It was a testing site for identity erasure. Create perfect vessels. Children with no past, no memory, no I. Ones that could be imprinted with new belief systems, new loyalty structures, even false histories. They weren't raising cultists. They were manufacturing apostles. One survivor, who escaped in 1985 and now lives under protection, described something that haunts even hardened intelligence agents: a hallway of mirrors, each with no reflection. Not because the glass was fake, but because, quote, we had no selves to cast one. These kids were taught that pain was the mother tongue, that their bones were fonts of truth, that their tongues were weapons of summoning. And when one child went too far, spoke a forbidden glyph backward, they didn't punish him. They sacrificed him. Not to God, not to the state, but to the voice beneath. This is not ancient history. The Red House only shut down in 1986. Its lead operator, later awarded for his advancements in child behavioral science, and given a Pentagon research grant. Look deeper and you'll find a pattern. When truth becomes too dangerous, they don't hide it. They disguise it as progress. The deeper you go, the more you realize this wasn't isolated madness. It was a system. A latticework of rituals, psychology, and power stretching across generations, woven like a black spider's web beneath the mountains. And at its heart was the Covenant of Three. This wasn't a religion. It wasn't even a cult in the traditional sense. It was a governance structure, a hidden order that oversaw all hollow doctrine activity across state lines. West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, parts of Georgia, and even Ohio. 3 seats, always 3, always hidden, 1 blood, 1 bone, 1 breath. That's how they divided power. The blood seat passed down leadership through lineage. It always belonged to the family who had sacrificed the most, measured not by money or years, but by children offered. This seat held the memory of the rites. Every symbol, every chant, every death, it lived in them. The bone seat was the tactician, the keeper of weapons, glyphs, maps. They were the enforcers. If a family wavered, if they failed to offer, failed to obey, it was bone who sent the warnings. And if those didn't work, it was bone who made them disappear. And then, the most feared, the Braith seat? No one ever saw them, no name, no face, only described in whispers. Someone who could enter dreams, speak languages the human throat wasn't meant to form. Some believed Braith was not a person at all, but a force, something that moved through people. A possession, a merging, a living will of the one below. Every 22 years, the Covenant gathered, always during the black moon. No phones, no photos, only ritual. During this gathering, a new hollow year was declared. A new sacrifice pattern was mapped. Towns were marked. Children chosen. This is why counties like Harlan and Breathitt, year after year, report spikes in runaways, suicides, and unexplained deaths right around the same moon cycle. Coincidence? Or choreography? Now understand, there were those who tried to resist. Brave men, isolated pastors, a few federal agents who went rogue. But once you go against the Covenant, your world begins to unravel. Friends forget your name, records vanish, and sometimes your own memories collapse. That's how deep the programming runs. This isn't just about cults. This is about control, identity, reality itself. You're not just learning history. You're remembering what they made you forget, and soon you'll see why they needed us silent. Let me ask you something dangerous. What if silence was never just the absence of sound? What if silence, true silence, was a weapon? That's what the Covenant of Three believed. And that's why they enforced something more terrifying than any ritual. More permanent than any scare, the Black Vow. You won't find it in any record, not even in the surviving hollow doctrine stone etchings. It wasn't written, it was taken, spoken only once, under breath and blood, in a room of firelight and bone ash. A vow that, once made, locked the tongue, not with fear, but with consequence. The belief was this: once you uttered the Black Vow, you were no longer your own. Your voice, your thoughts, your very will, belonged to the breath. You could live, eat, work, But you could never speak of the truth again. If you did, you didn't just die. You ceased. One defector called it soul erasure. He said after breaking the vow, barely, a few whispered warnings to an outsider. His brother began to glitch, not mentally, physically. Eyes dimmed. Speech broke into static. A week later, he was found kneeling in a field, mouth sewn shut with pine needles. No blood. No sign of a struggle. Just gone. Here's where it gets colder. A 1989 satellite scan revealed a perfect circle of abandoned cabins in the mountains above Marion, North Carolina. In the center, a wooden post charred, around it dozens of small child-sized shoes, left neatly in pairs. The file was labeled Echo Breach Site Delta, the only surviving field agent described hearing the sound of breath being pulled backward. He was discharged, diagnosed with acute psychogenic silence syndrome. But he wasn't insane. He was unbound. That's what happens when you speak against the black vow and survive. You're not freed. You're hollowed out. The voice they took doesn't return to you. It returns to them. This is what they've always feared, that one of us would survive the silence long enough to speak back. That's why they distort your history. Why they flood your world with noise, distraction, flashing lights. Because if you ever sat in true silence, if you ever heard that frequency just beneath the hum, you might wake up. And once you're awake, you can never go back. You ever wonder why the modern world feels artificial, like something essential has been carved out of it? You're not imagining it. It's not nostalgia. It's surgical reality manipulation. And it started right here, in the same Appalachian basin where the hollow doctrine once ruled, with the softening. That was their name for it. Whispered by old survivors, etched in bones buried under 300-year-old pines. The softening wasn't an event, it was a campaign, a slow generational erosion of willpower, memory, and masculine aggression. See, the blood cults of Appalachia weren't chaotic. They were vicious, but they had structure, command, purpose, and men, yes men, were shaped into tools of ritual and war, not in service of empire or economy, but in service of the inner will. They believed in testing the body, rewiring pain into clarity, training their minds to hear the frequencies below language. This made them dangerous, because a man who can sit in silence and feel no fear is a threat to every system of control. The softening sought to undo that. By the 1990s, remnants of the hollow doctrine had been infiltrated and neutralized, not by raids, not by force, but by distraction, by comfort, by chemical inversion. Communities were flooded with pharmaceuticals labeled as mood stabilizers. Water sources tested positive for compounds that dull prefrontal cortex activity. Local radio stations began looping the same 14 songs, each one structured to match documented brainwave suppression patterns. But the most effective tool: narrative replacement. The stories were erased. Old men who spoke of bone priests and binding trees were labeled schizophrenic. Their families were relocated. Their homes bulldozed and replaced with strip malls, fast food, and fluorescence. Every tale was rebranded. Cannibal cults, just hungry hillbillies, the womb below, backwoods fertility myths, ritual sacrifice, misremembered trauma. They didn't just hide the truth. They replaced it with mockery. So now, when a man speaks of ancestral memory, of gut instinct, of the need to know, he's called paranoid, toxic, dangerous. But here's the part they never counted on. The old blood never forgets. It murmurs in your bones when you hear a frequency that doesn't belong. It stirs in your gut when a lie is repeated too confidently. It haunts your dreams when comfort turns to static. You're not soft. You've just been put to sleep. And now, piece by piece, you're waking up. And once the old stories return, so does the fire. They say fire purifies. But in the old hollows it did something darker. It sealed. In every known hollow doctrine enclave, there was one ritual that ended every cycle, one act that marked the close of a blood season, the embering. This wasn't a festival. It wasn't celebratory. It was a silence-soaked night where every follower, every child, every marked elder gathered around a carved pit, not just to watch, not just to burn, to bury. See, the hollow weren't stupid. They knew eyes were watching. Government, outsiders, the curious. So each cycle, they took all their relics, glyphs, tools, flesh totems, scrolls made from tanned skin, and set them ablaze. But here's the catch: the fire was never meant to destroy them. It was meant to preserve them. The embering used a mix of bone ash, hog fat, and black pine resin. When the sacred artifacts burned, the smoke was inhaled by chosen initiates, young ones, blank ones, the ones marked as minds of tomorrow. That smoke carried more than scent. It carried memory. And the children, they didn't scream. They didn't cry. They spoke in tongues. They called it taking the ember inside. There are men alive today, quiet, working normal jobs, raising families, who were once those vessels. You've stood next to them in grocery stores, you've shaken their hands. But somewhere in the back of their skull, something sleeps. And all it needs is a trigger, a symbol, a tone, a phrase embedded deep in the unconscious. That's how you carry belief across generations without a trace. That's how you store fire in flesh. One former intelligence agent, deeply embedded in Appalachian field operations in the 70s, claimed in his deathbed recording that the embering was the most successful mnemonic mind transference ritual ever documented outside of sanctioned MKUltra environments. You know what that means. It means the hollow doctrine didn't die. It went internal. Not gone. Just quiet. And now, through media like this, through whispers on message boards, through the rise of men like you who question the walls, that ember is flickering again. Not in the woods. Not in the trees. In you. And once that fire catches, the systems that softened you will have no defense against what's coming next. Now let me tell you about the silence clock. Buried in a limestone cave just outside Hazard, Kentucky, sealed behind a false rock wall coated with iron dust and hex symbols, is a device no one wants to admit exists. Not a machine in the traditional sense. No wires, no lights. It's made of bone. Human, child, elder, warrior, priest. 33 skulls shaved and stacked with surgical precision, forming a circular lattice that pulses, not mechanically, but organically. Every 11 years, it emits a sound no one hears with ears. A resonance that hits the sternum, the teeth, the base of the spine. And when it sounds, something changes. Reports across eastern Kentucky show synchronized spikes in night terrors, animal disappearances, unexplained suicides, missing time, pregnancies with inexplicable genetic markers. This isn't a coincidence. This is a system reboot. See, the hollow doctrine believed history didn't move forward. It spiraled. And the silence clock was the heartbeat of that spiral. When it pulsed, the veil between the known and the buried thinned. And those who carried the ember, those who inhaled the smoke generations ago, felt the call, even if they didn't remember why. Now here's where it gets heavier. A 2004 DARPI acoustic research report, never meant to see daylight, leaked a spectral analysis of the Hazard Cave site. It concluded that the pulses emitted by the silence clock mirror the infrasound profiles of deep, earth tectonic shifts, and certain brainwave states recorded during advanced meditative trance. Let me say that again. The clock is synchronized to the planet, and to you. They weren't worshipping a god. They were sensing to a frequency. That's why the Covenant of Three made protecting the clock their highest law. Not the bloodlines. Not the rites. The pulse. Because once the silence clock fails, or worse, activates fully, every sleeper wakes. Every buried memory, every suppressed identity, every hollowed child now living a normal life, reconnects. Like a network, a hive, a warpath. And that moment is close. 2025 is the next 11th-year mark. You're not watching this by accident. You're hearing this because something inside you is already vibrating, already remembering. The question is, when the silence clock sounds again, will you rise, or remain asleep? There's a phrase etched into a collapsed altar stone deep in the Mammoth Cave system. Weathered? Almost gone, but still readable under black light and pressure rub. It reads, when the mouth reopens, so too will the hunger. That altar? Carbon dated to at least 200 years before European contact. And guess what's stranger? The language it's written in doesn't match any known native dialect. But it does match a carved sigil pattern found in 3 other places: a dried lake bed in Logan County, Duduvi, the underside of a now demolished Pentecostal revival tent in Dahlonega, GA, and the inner wall of a basement chamber beneath the first psychiatric hospital ever built in Tennessee. Let me connect this for you. They weren't worshipping chaos, they were containing it. The mouth, that's what they called the gateway. Not to hell. Not to the afterlife. Something far more disturbing. The reversal field. The hollow doctrine taught that beneath reality, beneath memory, language, perception, there is a true hunger. A raw, pulsing void that wants to erase not just life, but identity. It doesn't kill you. It devours the concept of you. So how do you protect against that? You bind it to flesh. You build altars in caves. You encode the containment rituals into bloodlines in memory, and you pass them down. But here's the part that should freeze your blood. In 2016, seismic scanners picked up a disturbance under Mammoth Cave, a shift, not geological, rhythmic, like breathing. Like something underneath that had been still for centuries, had just exhaled. The official report blamed natural expansion due to groundwater displacement. But insiders, men who don't talk on record, say otherwise. They say the mouth is preparing to open again. And every softening campaign, every ritual erased, every story turned into a punchline, was part of that plan. Because when the hunger wakes, it doesn't want resistance. It wants silence. It wants a world too soft, too distracted, too compliant to fight back. That's why they've turned you into an algorithm. Why they've replaced fire with dopamine. Why they've shamed aggression, banned discomfort, erased lineage. Because men like you, who feel something stirring, you're the threat? Not to society, to the system beneath it. Because the hunger has a face, and soon, it will remember yours. There's something they never taught you in school. Not because it was lost, but because it was deliberately removed. In 1949, a coal mine outside Cannibal, Kentucky collapsed, killing 12 men. Tragic, yes. But what the official report didn't mention was the bodies, when recovered, weren't whole, limbs missing, chests hollowed out, no blood, no scavengers, no signs of trauma consistent with a cave-in. Just clean surgical consumption. The rescue team, traumatized beyond repair, made a pact of silence, one that was broken decades later by a single survivor on his deathbed. He whispered 3 words. They were waiting. Now, who were they? For years, rumors circulated of a sect known only as the Grey Mouth. Not quite human, not quite spirit, a lineage that had evolved, or devolved, inside the limestone underworld, feasting on those who entered uninvited. But this isn't just another local legend. In 1983, a geologist mapping cave thermals captured infrared footage, classified immediately by the Army Corps of Engineers. A flicker, a shape, bipedal, no heat signature, moving vertically along a wall at impossible speed. They said it was a mapping error. But what they didn't tell you was this: 2 weeks later, that geologist's house burned down. With him, his wife, and their 2 daughters inside. The fire report concluded, no accelerants. Ignition source unknown. You starting to see the pattern. Every witness dies in obscurity. Every trace buried under red tape or folklore. Because the Grey Mouth isn't a tale to be laughed at around a campfire. It's a population control mechanism. They live off the forgotten, the voiceless, and most of all, the curious. And who protects them? Look deeper into the genealogy of those who fund Appalachia's historical societies. Look into the offshore accounts feeding local churches with emergency restoration grants. You'll find that the same surnames appear over and over: Faulkner, Cross, Ainsley, Boone. Not saviors, not stewards, shepherds, of the herd, for the mouth. So now you're faced with a question that decides the rest of your life. Do you continue believing you were born into a sane, safe, protected world? Or do you admit the truth, that what waits in the dark beneath your feet knows your name, knows your shape, and is counting down the seconds until you forget how to scream? So here we are, the final descent. By now you've felt it, haven't you? That low hum beneath the bones. That shift in breath when the truth brushes against your skin. You thought you were just watching a video. But this was never entertainment. This was initiation, because what's hidden in the hollers of Appalachia, the flesh cults, the silence machines, the erased villages and inverted churches, it's not just history. It's architecture, ritual design, spiritual infrastructure buried under 300 years of God, gas, and government. And if you've made it this far, it means you weren't meant to forget. So let me give you the last key, the one they kill to protect, the one men lose their minds trying to deny, the one whispered in dead languages carved into the rib cages of children found near the witch vine crossings. Time doesn't erase, it layers. And the deeper you go, the more you hear them, the echoed, not ghosts, not spirits, refractions, memories of acts so primal, so drenched in blood and bone and silence, that they become geographic, imprinted into rock, into tree bark, into the DNA of the Appalachian spine. Every scream ever swallowed, every child ever buried alive to seal the gates, every song ever sung in reverse beneath a waxing moon. It's all still happening. Not in the past, right now. In the folds between your seconds, in the shadows you mistake for movement, in the dreams you forget before you open your eyes. And those who control the narrative, they don't fear exposure. They fear remembrance. Because a man who remembers who he is, who sees through the paper walls of history, is a threat, not to the system, to the ritual keeping it alive. So I leave you with one final command, one last defiant symbol to prove you've awakened. Comment, the silence is broken, not once, but twice. Once for the system watching, and once for the part of you that just woke up, because you're not who you were an hour ago. You don't belong to them anymore. You are not cattle. You are not a son of the lie. You are a blade forged in buried memory. And the war you were born for has already begun. We'll see you in the hollow. But only if you remember how to find the dark.